wind howled like a warning no one could quite decipher. A thin cry threading through the frozen Wyoming morning. Ethan Caldwell had heard storms scream before, but this sound was different. It was sharp, human, a sound that crawled under the skin and refused to be ignored. He stopped his horse, Storm, and listened again, narrowing his eyes toward the distant tree line where the frost-bitten pines stood like silent witnesses waiting for something terrible to unfold. He didn't want to ask the question that rose in his mind. Who is crying out here in this hell of a winter? But the sound demanded an answer. He nudged Storm forward, snow crunching under hooves as the cold bit through his gloves. The plain stretched open behind him, an empty sweep of white that felt almost sacred in its loneliness. But ahead, the land seemed to tremble with the weight of something unseen. Ethan followed the sound, each step pulling him deeper into the hush that settles after a storm, that dangerous silence where even the wind holds its breath. When he reached the pines, the crying sharpened, thin and desperate. He dismounted quickly, boots sinking into the icy crust. The cold knifed through him, but he pushed forward, brushing aside low branches until he saw them. Two little girls curled together in the snow. They were no more than 6 years old, twins with tangled hair and faces streaked by tears and dirt. Their bare feet were blue with cold, tiny toes stiff against the ice. The blankets around them were torn and useless, nothing but thin fabric fluttering in the wind. Ethan's heart lurched. "Dear God," he breathed, the words slipping out before he could cage them. Then the growl came, low, hungry, close. From behind the trees, 2 prairie wolves emerged, ribs sharp under matted fur, eyes wild with winter starvation. One stepped closer to the girls, teeth bared, breath misting in the cold. Ethan didn't think, he reacted. His rifle rose as if it had always been a part of him. The shot cracked across the plains, echoing off the frozen branches. The first wolf fell instantly, collapsing into the red-tinged snow, but the second lunged before the echo died. Ethan dropped the rifle, instinct taking over. The wolf collided with him, knocking him backward. Claws tore at his coat, and hot breath scorched the cold air inches from his neck. He wrestled it, shoving its weight aside, grabbing for the knife at his belt. Snow filled his vision. Teeth snapped inches from his face, then steel met fur. The wolf jerked, snarled, twisted again, and Ethan drove the blade deeper until the body slackened and fell still. His breath came hard and fast, fog drifting around him. The silence returned, heavier this time, more dangerous. He pushed the wolf aside and stumbled to the twins. "Hey," he said softly, kneeling down. "You're all right now. I've got you." One girl, Ella, though he didn't yet know her name, blinked at him through frost-rimmed lashes. The other, Lila, whimpered when he touched her ankle. It was swollen, angry with cold and injury. Their small hands trembled against his sleeves, clinging to warmth, to the life that had stumbled upon them just in time. Ethan wrapped them in his coat, lifting both with surprising gentleness despite the strain in his arms. They weighed almost nothing. The cold had already taken too much from them. He carried them out of the trees, placing them carefully in front of him on Storm. Their shivers rattled against his chest as he rode fast toward the cabin. The storm had left the land raw and bruised, snow piling against the edges of the valley, and sky hanging low like a heavy blanket. By the time Ethan reached his cabin, Ella's breaths were shallow, and Lila's small body leaned limp against him. He kicked open the door, the warmth inside nowhere near enough, but better than the killing cold outside. He placed the twins by the hearth and threw wood onto the fire, coaxing the flames higher until the room glowed with gold and orange. "Stay with me," he murmured, rubbing their small hands, trying to force life back into their fingers. Ella's skin was pale, almost translucent with cold. Lila winced when he touched her ankle, flinching in pain. Ethan grabbed a pot, warmed milk, and held the tin cup to Ella's lips, helping her sip slowly. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she looked at him with something like hope. Fragile, but real. He cleaned Lila's ankle next, wrapping it with steady, careful hands. She watched him with wide, fearful eyes, but she didn't pull away. The trust came quietly, as if her small heart understood something her mind couldn't yet grasp. When the fire filled the cabin with heat, the color began to return to their cheeks. Ella leaned into him, her head against his shoulder. Lila whispered a faint thank you, voice thin as a thread. Ethan swallowed hard. He didn't know who they were, where they had come from, or what tragedy had pushed them into the snow. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever had chased them out there in the storm wasn't finished. Their arrival was no accident. The world had shifted the moment he heard that cry, and something deep inside him shifted with it. As the wind outside died to a whisper, Ethan looked at the twins, huddled close to the fire, and felt the weight of destiny settle slowly onto his shoulders. Ethan stayed awake long after the fire settled into a slow, steady burn. The twins slept beneath thick quilts, small bodies curled close together as if the storm still whispered outside their dreams. He sat at the table with his rifle cleaned and ready, listening to the wind drag its fingers across the cabin walls. Whatever had pushed those girls into the snow wasn't finished. He could feel that truth settle in his bones like the cold. At first light, he checked the girls. Color had returned to Ella's cheeks, the purple tint fading from her lips. Lila's ankle was still swollen, but no longer as angry. When they woke, they clung to each other, startled until they recognized him. Ella whispered, "You stayed." Ethan nodded. "I said I would." He fed them warm biscuits and milk. Only when their trembling eased did he ask the question he had avoided all night. "Where's your mama?" The air tightened. Ella stared at the floor while Lila twisted the blanket between her fingers. Finally, Ella told him everything in halting pieces. The long journey west. Lydia trying to turn hardship into adventure. Then the sudden roar of horses behind them, the scarves covering hard men's faces, gunfire, shouting, their mother pushing them under the wagon, telling them not to make a sound. And then a name. McCready. Ethan felt a chill colder than the wind slide through him. The McCready gang was known across the territory, men who didn't leave things half-finished. Robberies, vanished wagons, bodies buried by weather and time. Trouble always followed where they rode. The twins' voices fell to whispers. Their mother had cut loose the horses, driven the wagon into the dark with nothing but desperation behind her. When the wagon crashed, everything went white. Snow, terror, silence. Lydia had disappeared into the trees, leaving only footprints the storm nearly swallowed. Ethan placed his hand over Ella's, steady and warm. "Your mama's alive," he said. "If she made it through that night, she's still fighting." He didn't know whether the words were truth or hope, but the twins needed something to hold on to. He saddled Storm soon after, wrapped the girls near the fire, and told them to keep the door barred. Lila tugged his sleeve and whispered, "Fine, Mama." He answered with the only promise he could live with. "I'll try my best." The trail was easy enough to follow. The burned wagon stood like a blackened skeleton against the white field, bullet holes punched clean through what remained of the boards. Blood marked the snow, not enough to mean death, but enough to signal pain. Smaller footprints angled toward the tree line. A woman, exhausted, hurt, running. He searched until the tracks vanished into deeper drifts. No body, no sign of surrender. Only cold silence and thin scratches of hope. Lydia Hartman was alive somewhere. Or at least she had been long enough to leave the wreck behind. As Ethan turned back toward the cabin, Storm grew restless, ears flicking. Then Ethan saw her. A lone figure staggered across the white field, swaying in the saddle as if held up by will alone. Her winter coat hung in tatters, hair plastered to her face. Blood had frozen down one arm in sharp crimson patterns. When he rode closer, she lifted her head, and exhaustion carved deeper lines along her cheekbones. "The girls," she whispered before he even reached her. "My girls? Are they alive?" "They're safe," Ethan said, "inside my cabin." Relief spilled across her face so suddenly it almost dropped her from the saddle. When she slid, he caught her easily. She was light, far too light, cold to the bone, breath quick and thin. He lifted her with care and led her toward the cabin. The moment Ethan opened the door, two small cries cut through the room. "Mama!" Ella and Lila tumbled toward her, arms stretching, feet stumbling across the floor. Lydia dropped to her knees despite the pain, gathering both girls to her, pressing her face into their hair as if to memorize the warmth. A broken laugh escaped her, tangled with a sob. Ethan turned away for a moment, giving them a sliver of privacy he sensed they needed. When Lydia finally sank into a chair, exhaustion pulling her down, Ethan examined the wound on her shoulder. A bullet had grazed her, deep and messy. She stayed silent through the cleaning, jaw tight as he poured whiskey over the torn flesh and wrapped it with fresh cloth. Pain lived in her eyes, but strength lived there too. Quiet, unwavering. Only once the twins drifted into sleep again did Ethan ask, "Why are they after you?" Lydia stared into the fire. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. She told him about the ambush, about crates marked with army seals cracked open to reveal bars of stolen gold. She hadn't meant to see it, but she did. And the McCready gang didn't tolerate witnesses. "They think I know where they're taking it," she said. "They think I heard things I wasn't meant to hear." Her gaze lifted. "And they will come again." Ethan felt the truth settle heavily in the room. The gang wouldn't let this go. Not with gold at stake. Not with a woman who had seen too much. Lydia looked at him then. Really looked. "If we stay, we bring this danger to you." Something tightened inside him. He glanced at the girls sleeping in his bed, their faces softened by warmth and safety. Then at Lydia, worn down but unbroken. 3 strangers had stepped into his life in the span of a storm. Yet somehow, it felt like the space around him had been waiting for them all along. "You're not going anywhere," he said quietly. "Not while I'm here." Outside, the winter wind moved across the frozen land like a warning. Inside, the fragile beginnings of a new life settled into place, uncertain, dangerous, but deeply, undeniably real. The days that followed settled into a rhythm neither Ethan nor Lydia had expected. Winter still ruled the valley, but inside the cabin, a fragile warmth took root. Thin at first, like the weak light of dawn, yet growing a little stronger each hour. The twins' laughter became part of the air, soft and bright, echoing through the wooden walls as they played near the hearth or followed Ethan outside to watch him tend the horses. Lydia moved through the cabin with quiet purpose, mending tears in coats, washing linen stiff from cold, cooking simple stews that filled the room with scents none of them had known for weeks. It wasn't a real home yet, but something close enough to touch. Sometimes Ethan caught Lydia watching him from across the room, her expression difficult to read, soft, grateful, guarded, unsure. Other times she looked away quickly, as if the weight of being seen pressed too heavily on her. There were moments when they spoke barely a handful of words, and then moments when a silence passed between them that felt almost like understanding. But beneath this small peace lay a shadow neither of them could ignore. One morning, Ethan stepped outside to check the woodpile. Snow had drifted along the side of the cabin overnight, sculpting white waves against the logs. Storm snorted from the corral, ears angled sharply toward the tree line. Ethan followed the horse's gaze. There, half buried beneath wind-blown snow, was a single boot print. Too large to be his, too fresh to be old. Ethan crouched beside it, brushing away frost. The tread was sharp, recent. Someone had stood just yards from his door. His jaw tightened. When he returned to the cabin, Lydia looked up from where she was braiding Ella's hair. She read the tension in his shoulders instantly. "What is it?" "Someone was here," he said, watching. Lydia's hand stilled. Ella glanced up, sensing the shift in the room. Lila moved closer to her mother, fingers clutching Lydia's sleeve. Ethan spoke gently but firmly. "You're all safe, but we need to be careful." Lydia nodded. Fear flickered for a moment, but it wasn't fear for herself. It was for her daughters. She pulled them closer, holding them until their breathing steadied again. That night, Ethan checked the windows twice, then 3 times. He stoked the fire, tightened the locks, and kept the rifle propped beside the door. The twins slept together in his bed, while Lydia rested on the cot he'd brought near the fire. Ethan stayed awake long after the cabin went quiet. In the glow of the dying flames, he could see Lydia shift slightly, tucking the blanket around her daughters even in sleep. He realized then that she hadn't rested properly since the night the gang attacked her wagon. Every sound made her stir. Every gust of wind made her shoulders tense. She was living inside her own storm, one that hadn't stopped the night she arrived at his door. The next morning offered a small reprieve. The sky softened, letting thin sunlight spill across the valley. Lydia suggested airing out the quilts. The twins begged to help Ethan mend the fence line. Lila limped only slightly now, leaning on Ella when the ground dipped too sharply. Ethan watched them trot after him like 2 restless shadows, their breath puffing in white clouds. Their laughter rose into the air, fragile but real. He showed them how to hammer a loose board back into place. Ella held the nails, proud of herself, while Lila offered advice that made no sense but came with determined conviction. Their joy made the cold seem less cruel. Lydia watched from the porch, arms folded loosely, eyes warm. She looked like someone searching for a version of life she had once believed unreachable. Ethan walked toward her when the fence was finished. For a moment they simply stood side by side, watching the girls. Lydia's voice was soft when she spoke. "They haven't laughed like that in months," he nodded. "Kids feel safer than they say." Her gaze drifted toward the tree line. "Safety doesn't exist for us. Not anymore. The McCreadys won't stop." She hesitated. "I don't want to bring danger to your door, Ethan." "You didn't bring it," he said. They did. Their eyes met, and a current passed between them, unspoken, uncertain, but undeniable. But peace cracked again that evening. Ethan was returning from the barn when he saw something hanging from the gate. A strip of leather, cut clean, the end soaked in melted snow. It wasn't his. He lifted it, turning it in the dim light. It belonged to a saddlebag. And the cut was fresh. He followed faint tracks across the snow until they disappeared into the forest's shadows. Whoever had been here knew how to hide. They'd moved close enough to the cabin to measure it, to test its defenses, to watch the family inside. When he returned, Lydia saw the look on his face and braced herself. "Tell me." "Someone's scouting," Ethan said. "Not just passing through, they're circling us." Lydia's breath caught. The twins stood near the fire, and she immediately moved in front of them, instinctive and fierce. Ethan saw the terror in her eyes, but he also saw something sharper, a determination that had kept her alive long before he found her. She wouldn't let fear rule her again. "What do we do?" she asked. "We prepare." From that moment, the cabin transformed. He reinforced the window frames, checked the rifle twice each day, moved supplies closer to the hearth. Lydia taught the girls where to hide, how to stay silent, how to listen for Ethan's voice. The twins obeyed without protest. They understood more than children should. Evenings grew heavier with tension. But beneath the fear, something else grew too. Trust. The kind that forms when two people stand at the edge of danger and choose, again and again, not to step back. One night, while the fire crackled softly, Lydia sat beside Ethan at the table. The twins slept soundly nearby, exhausted from play. Lydia spoke quietly so as not to wake them. "I was alone for so long," she said. "I didn't think anyone would help us. I didn't think anyone could." Ethan kept his eyes on the fire, his voice equally quiet. No one should face something like this alone. She studied him, her expression softening. "Why are you helping us? Really?" He didn't answer at first. Then he spoke the truth, simple and steady. "Because I couldn't walk away." She swallowed, tears stirring but held back. For a moment, the shadows in the room seemed gentler. But outside, beyond the reach of the fire's glow, the snow shifted with unseen footsteps. Tracks that would vanish by morning, eyes watching from the dark, the McCready gang drawing closer with every passing night. Their small, fragile home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a battleground waiting for its spark. Night settled early, thick and heavy, pressing against the windows like a living thing. The sky held no stars, only a low ceiling of clouds that swallowed the moon and turned the world into a cold, shifting void. Ethan felt the change long before the first sound reached the cabin. A storm wasn't coming, not of wind or snow, but of men, violence, and the unfinished business they'd carried across half a territory. He moved through the room with quiet purpose, checking the rifle, then the revolver, then the shutters one last time. Lydia watched him from the hearth, her hands trembling slightly as she stroked Ella's hair. The twins sensed the tension without understanding its shape. They clung to their mother, eyes wide, breaths shallow. "When it starts," Ethan said softly, "take the girls to the storage alcove. Stay low. Don't open the door unless it's me." Lydia nodded. Fear had tilted her shoulders forward, but her voice stayed steady. "And you?" "I'll be right here." He tried to give her reassurance, but his heart beat with a cold, steady dread. He had fought wolves, blizzards, gunmen before, but never for something that mattered this much. The first sign came like a whisper, faint hoofbeats muffled by snow. Then another, then more. Storm stomped in the corral, senses flaring. Ethan stepped closer to the window, keeping to the shadows. 4 riders emerged from the dark, shapes first, then silhouettes, then men hardened by cruelty and winter. They formed a half circle around the cabin, rifles slung across their shoulders, lantern light glinting off cold barrel steel. At the center rode a man broader than the rest, face wrapped in a scarf, hat pulled low. One of the McCreadys, maybe their leader, maybe just the cruelest among them. A voice cut through the night. "Caldwell." Rough, gravel thick, too steady to be bluffing. "We know you're keeping the woman. Bring her out and we'll spare the rest of you." Ethan didn't answer. The voice hardened. "You got 5 seconds before we burn that cabin and everyone inside." Behind him, Lydia clutched her daughters. Ethan felt the weight of their lives settle against his back like a physical force. He opened the window shutter just enough to aim. 5 seconds became 1. He fired. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked through the night, bullets thudding into the walls, splintering wood, shattering glass. Lydia grabbed the twins and pulled them toward the alcove, shielding their bodies with her own as the room exploded in noise and dust. The lantern on the table toppled, flames licking dangerously at the wood before Ethan kicked it aside. "Stay down," he shouted, moving to the next window. One rider fell from his horse, clutching his leg where Ethan's bullet had struck. The others scattered, firing back in sharp bursts. The cabin shook under the assault. Holes punched through the shutters, scattering fragments across the floor. Lydia forced the alcove door shut behind her and the girls, holding them tight as they cried into her coat. Her heart hammered in her chest like a fist trying to break free. Every shot felt like it landed inside her bones. Outside, the McCready men shouted to each other, circling for a better angle. Ethan loaded another round, ducked, fired again. A bullet grazed his arm, ripping through his coat, heat and pain flashing in a sharp streak. He gritted his teeth and moved to the door, bracing it with his shoulder as someone rammed the outside. A heavy blow cracked the wood, then another. The door buckled. "They're coming in," Ethan shouted. The final strike sent the door crashing inward. A man lunged through the opening, knife in hand, eyes burning with violence. Ethan grabbed his arm, twisting hard. The blade scraped Ethan's ribs, cutting deep enough to sting, but not enough to slow him. He slammed the man into the wall, struggling for the upper hand. The intruder snarled, pushing back, nearly overpowering him. Then a gunshot roared behind them. The attacker dropped. Ethan turned. Lydia stood in the alcove doorway, revolver shaking in her hand, the twins clinging to her legs. Smoke curled from the barrel. Her face held no triumph, only terror at what she had done, and a fiercer terror at what would have happened if she hadn't. Ethan's breath caught. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, swallowing hard. "Keep going. Don't stop." The words steadied him more than she knew. He picked up the fallen man's rifle, pressed his shoulder against the ruined doorframe, and fired into the night. The remaining riders scattered, their courage wavering. The leader cursed, shouting orders. But winter was already swallowing their advantage. Snow made shadows deceive. The cabin's firelight blinded them. They had expected an easy kill, not a man and woman ready to fight to the last breath. Another shot rang out from Ethan's rifle, then another from the gang. A bullet clipped the edge of the cabin. Another tore through the shingles, showering the room with debris. Lydia dropped to the floor with the twins, covering them as the fight raged outside. Finally, after minutes that felt like hours, silence crept into the clearing. One rider shouted, voice cracking with fear, "We're pulling back, now!" Hoofbeats thundered as the men retreated into the dark, their silhouettes swallowed by the storm that had been waiting just beyond the tree line. Ethan didn't breathe until the last sound faded. He shut the door as best he could, leaning against the broken frame. Blood seeped slowly down his side, staining his shirt. His breath trembled, but he stayed standing. Lydia crawled toward him, pulling Ella and Lila with her. When she saw the wound, her voice broke. "Ethan, I'm all right," he whispered. But when his knees finally gave, she caught him before he hit the floor. Ella wrapped her arms around his neck. Lila pressed her face against his chest, sobbing. Lydia held all three of them, shaking, breathing hard, refusing to let go. The cabin was wrecked, but they were alive. And for the first time, Ethan felt the truth settle deep and undeniable. He hadn't fought for strangers tonight. He had fought for family, the only family he had ever wanted without knowing he did. Morning came slowly, as if the sun itself hesitated to cross into a world that had nearly drowned in gunfire the night before. The storm clouds thinned to a gray hush. Snow lay scattered around the ruined door, mingled with broken wood and the dark stains of violence. The cabin felt quieter than it ever had. Too quiet, yet somehow still intact, like a heart that kept beating after being cracked open. Ethan woke to the faint sting of bandages tightening against the wound at his ribs. Lydia knelt beside him, adjusting the cloth with trembling hands. She hadn't slept. Her hair was still tangled from the fight, cheeks pale with exhaustion, but her eyes remained steady, watching him as if afraid he might slip away. "You should be resting," he murmured. "So should you," she answered softly. "But I needed to know you were still here." Ella and Lila slept curled together on the cot near the fire, clutching Ethan's patched coat as if it were some kind of talisman. Their breaths rose and fell in perfect rhythm. Seeing them safe gave Ethan enough strength to sit up, even as pain tugged sharply along his side. "We survived," Lydia said, almost as though she needed to hear it aloud. "We did," Ethan replied. "But they'll be back eventually, once they regroup." Lydia's hands tightened around the bandages. "Then we won't be here when they do. I can't ask you to fight for us again. We'll leave as soon as you're well enough." The thought hit him harder than the knife had. He looked toward the twins, then back at Lydia. "I didn't fight because you asked," he said quietly. "I fought because I couldn't imagine losing you. Any of you." She exhaled, shaky and unsure, as if hope had surprised her. "Ethan, I don't want to run anymore. I'm tired. The girls are tired. But staying, that's asking too much of you." He shook his head. "It isn't." But she didn't answer, and something in her silence told him she feared staying would break her more than leaving. Days passed, each one sharpening the fragile edges of whatever they were becoming. Ethan mended the door, patched bullet holes in the walls, repaired the shingles where gunfire had shattered the roof. Lydia helped where she could, though her shoulder still ached from the bullet wound that grazed her. She moved slower, but with a quiet determination, as if fixing the cabin meant fixing the fractures inside herself too. Ella and Lila clung to Ethan more with each passing day. They followed him outside, wrapped in thick coats, handing him nails or gathering kindling. Lila limped less now, and Ella regained her bright chatter. They laughed more easily, arguing playfully over who hammered a board better or who poured the soup with fewer spills. Their voices filled the cabin like light. One evening, after supper, the four of them sat by the fire. Lydia sewed a tear in Ethan's coat while the twins played with the wooden horses he had carved. Ethan sat across from her, watching her fingers work. She didn't replace the torn piece of fabric. She mended it, thread by thread. "You fix what can be saved," she said quietly, without lifting her gaze. "It's the only way to make something last." He knew she wasn't talking about the coat that night. When the twins finally fell asleep, Lydia stepped outside. Ethan followed her into the cold. The air smelled like thawing pine, the first hint of spring breaking through winter's grip. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the girls, about their future. They adore you, more than they've ever trusted any man besides their father." Ethan swallowed. "I care for them and for you. That's why I need to say this." She turned toward him, eyes glassy in the moonlight. "If we stay, we put you in danger. If the McCreadys ever learn we're here, they'll return with more men. You've already risked enough." "I'll risk more," he said, "if it means keeping all of you safe." Her breath caught a small, fragile sound. "You shouldn't have to, but I want to." Silence settled between them. Deep, aching, filled with everything they hadn't yet dared to say. Lydia's gaze softened, but uncertainty still lingered in the way she held herself, as if one wrong step could shatter everything. The next day, spring finally revealed itself. Snow melted into streams along the valley floor. Birds returned with cautious songs. The earth softened enough for Lydia to plant a small patch of soil behind the cabin. Ethan built a simple wooden frame for the garden, and Ella and Lila helped by dropping seeds into the neat little trenches Lydia made. Later that afternoon, Ethan began crafting a new bed for the girls from leftover timber. They hovered nearby, inspecting every carved corner, offering suggestions, interrupting each other with excitement. Lydia watched them from the porch, one hand resting lightly on her heart, her expression softening with every passing moment. By sundown, Ethan's wound throbbed, but he kept working until Lydia touched his arm and whispered, "Rest, please." He set the tools aside and followed her to the porch. They sat together, shoulder to shoulder, watching the twins chase each other in the fading light. Lydia leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "They deserve a place where they're not running." "They have one," Ethan said. "Here." She turned to face him. There was fear in her eyes, but there was hope too, trembling beneath it. "Ethan, if we truly stayed, would you want that?" He didn't hesitate. "I would." Lydia's breath trembled out of her, a soft, breaking sigh. She reached for his hand. He took it gently, as if afraid she might vanish with the next breeze. In that quiet, in the fading light of a world just beginning to thaw, something unspoken became real. A family wasn't always born. Sometimes it was chosen. Sometimes it chose you. The wind softened as evening settled across the valley, carrying the scent of thawing earth and the first green promises of spring. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled in a slow, comforting rhythm, wrapping the room in a warm glow that touched every corner. Ella and Lila slept close together, their newly built bed holding them in a safety they had not felt for months. Lydia pulled a blanket higher over their shoulders, her hands gentle, her breath steady at last. Ethan watched her from the doorway, the quiet peace on her face easing something long wounded inside him. He stepped forward, and she turned toward him, her eyes soft in the firelight. No words were needed. The storm that had brought them together had also carved space for something new, something fragile, tender, and real. He placed his hand over hers, and she leaned into the touch, letting the moment linger. Outside, the land waited for morning, for the small footsteps of children, for the steady rhythm of work and laughter returning. And inside, where warmth met silence, the promise of a new beginning settled around them like a whisper. They were no longer alone. Not anymore. End of article. Good night.